The movie starts in 1992 at a vineyard in Umbria, Italy, right next to a huge estate. The legendary founder of Lamborghini Automobiles, Ferruccio Lamborghini, sits deep in his thoughts in the living room. He is looking intently over the miniature models of two iconic supercars, the Lamborghini Countach and the Ferrari Mondial. The scene then abruptly shifts to an empty strip of road. There, Ferruccio, in his Countach, sits right next to Enzo Ferrari, who is in a red Mondial. It seems as if these two juggernauts are gearing up for a drag race. Seconds later, they launch their cars and the race begins. In a notable moment, the red Ferrari takes the lead when they reach the first curve. We then travel 47 years in the past as a young Ferruccio returns to his hometown of Cento along with his best friend, Matteo. The Second World War has just ended, and the two young men are returning after having served in the Italian military during the conflict. While Matteo wants to immediately head towards his home, Ferruccio has a different plan. He retrieves a ring from a bag and intends to visit his girlfriend, Clelia Monti, first. Matteo teases that she may not be waiting for him, but the latter is confident in his love. He soon finds Clelia at a local cafe and gives her the ring. She is extremely shocked to see her lover after so many years, but embraces him with joy. Following this, Ferruccio, along with his girlfriend, returns to his home. He is enthusiastically greeted by two younger brothers and his father, Antonio Lamborghini. They are relieved to see him alive and unharmed after several years of separation due to the Great War. It also seems like the Lamborghini family embraces their new member, Clelia, with open arms. A little later, Ferruccio has a conversation with his father while they both work on their farm. Antonio is a hardworking farmer who owns a small piece of fertile land. It is the only source of income for their family, especially now that the eldest son is back from the army. However, Ferruccio expresses the desire to leave their farm and move to the city. He has seen the massive technological developments firsthand during his time in the army. The young man realizes that, unlike the pre-war era, manual farming will not be sustainable for the future. Antonio is stunned by this suggestion and asks what he plans to do with their land. But Ferruccio states that he doesn't want to inherit the farm. He urges Antonio to give it to his younger brothers who have clearly worked hard in his absence. He, on the other hand, plans to start a tractor manufacturing company. The idea is to produce smaller, more affordable tractors to benefit small and middle-scale farmers. However, Antonio dismisses the idea, pointing that they are farmers who should stick to farming. Ferruccio replies that he worked as a mechanic in the army and plans to use his skills in this endeavor. He also shares that he will participate in the annual racing competition, Terra dei Motori. If he wins the race, he will use the prize money to kickstart the tractor company. Furthermore, young Ferruccio hopes to ensure that the Lamborghini name lives on. His father, on the other hand, is still doubtful about this grand plan. Following this, Ferruccio, Clelia, and Matteo move to the financial district of Cento where they rent an apartment. Few months later, they attend a New Year's Eve party in a club. They are all young, full of hope and happy despite their limited financial capabilities. Ferruccio even asks Clelia to marry him, and she gladly says yes. On the other hand, poor Matteo doesn't have the same kind of luck when it comes to his love life. He sees a beautiful blonde woman smiling towards his general direction. The young man thinks that finally his luck is starting to favor him. But when the blonde walks right past him and kisses another man, Matteo is left disappointed. Ferruccio and Claudia then intervene and help him enjoy the festivities. 6 months later, the Terra dei Motori annual racing competition finally arrives. Ferruccio and Matteo have transformed an abandoned 500cc car into a powerful 650cc machine using some clever engineering tricks. They arrive at the race and see the legendary Enzo Ferrari as the chief guest. At this point in time, the old man has already left the prestigious car company, Alfa Romeo. He has also newly founded his own corporation, Ferrari SPA. The announcer also exclaims that by next year, Ferrari will have its own car participating in several prestigious races. Clearly jealous of his success, young Ferruccio points out that Enzo behaves like he owns the world. Matteo then gives his friend a dose of reality by saying that the old man is the most famous name in the automotive world. Shortly afterwards, the race begins, and almost immediately 3 cars separate from the rest of the bunch. Ferruccio and Matteo in their homemade machine are sandwiched between 2 well-known manufacturers, Porsche and Mercedes. Everything seems to be going good as they hang on to the second position. But as soon as they enter the last 2 laps, things start unraveling. Mercedes, who is running in the 3rd position, overtakes them in a curve. A pumped-up Ferruccio animatedly screams at Matteo to drive faster. He wants to push their car to the limit and win at all costs. Matteo, who is driving the car, is unwilling to take a risk as the road is just too narrow. Enraged, Ferruccio grabs the steering wheel and tries to steer them hard into the corner. This tussle between the 2 friends eventually causes the car to crash into an electric pole. They sit there bruised and bleeding while Mercedes and Porsche zoom forward. The scene then shifts into the future where the Lamborghini Countach is racing against the Ferrari Mondial. There is only a small distance between the 2 of them. Back in the past, Ferruccio and Matteo are dealing with the aftermath of their devastating loss. They are back in their apartment, nursing their injuries and arguing with each other. Ferruccio says they could have won the race, but his friend argues that they could have lost their lives. The quarrel is broken by Clelia, who calls them both for breakfast. Later on, Ferruccio sits down with his wife, but doesn't look his usual upbeat self. He grabs the newspaper only to see the faces of the winners of Terra dei Motori plastered on the front page. Clelia notices his bad mood and asks if everything is okay. He replies that he is simply upset because they lost the race. But she is not satisfied with the answer and keeps digging into the matter. Eventually, Ferruccio relents and admits his fear about not being good enough to start a tractor company. He doesn't actually believe that they lost the race because Matteo was unwilling to take risks. Instead, he blames himself for not being a good enough mechanic. Clelia then calmly reassures him and says she fully believes that all his dreams will come true. Next, she turns the conversation into a different direction. She asks what happened to his rowing exercise machine idea. Ferruccio exclaims that there is no market for such equipment as the post-war shortage of food has made everyone skinny. The wife, however, says that she might need such a machine to lose weight in about 8 months' time. Her husband has no idea what she is talking about. But Matteo, who has been listening to the conversation, scolds him for being an idiot. He points out that Clelia is hinting at her pregnancy. Ferruccio is left speechless while Matteo cheekily asks them to name their son after him. This sudden good news reinvigorates Ferruccio's drive to pursue his dream. The following morning, he visits the Bank of Cento to seek a loan for the tractor industry. But for some reason, he hesitates and doesn't actually get inside the bank. Instead, he returns to his village and visits his father, Antonio. The duo then sit down to have a conversation over a cup of tea. Antonio has already sensed that his son needs help by looking at his tensed body language. He makes the young man's job easier by offering all the cash he currently has. However, Ferruccio points out that it will not be enough and reiterates his plan of establishing a tractor industry. He urges Antonio to believe in him and help fund his dream project. The old man doesn't say anything and quietly goes into the kitchen. Seconds later, he reemerges with a tin box that contains the legal papers for his farm. Anotino gives his eldest son the papers and tells him to go fulfill his dreams. Ferruccio thanks his father for the help and heads back to the city. However, back at home, Clelia disapproves of her husband risking the family property for his personal business venture. She urges him to return the papers as soon as possible. She reminds him that the farm isn't his to use. Rather, it belongs to his younger brothers. After all, they toiled on it for years when he was away serving in the army. However, Ferruccio states that his father is too proud of man and will not take the papers back. She then comes up with another solution. He can take a loan against the farm, but all the money must be kept in an account under his father's name. Ferruccio knows there is no point in arguing with his wife, and thus he agrees to her plan. The following day, he once again visits the Bank of Cento and this time enters inside. He submits the farm's papers and asks for a loan against it. The teller checks the authenticity of the papers and eventually grants him the loan. However, Ferruccio puts all the money in an account under his name instead of his father's. With the funding secured, Ferruccio and Matteo begin work on the tractor project. They have a rough idea for a machine that is small enough for a local farmer and powerful enough for large-scale industries. The machine will be powered by a 1,548 cubic centimeter engine that they plan to buy from a company named Morris. But Matteo points out an obvious flaw in their design. A machine like this would consume a large amount of gasoline as compared to their rivals. However, the brilliant Ferruccio has a plan to overcome this hurdle. He has come up with a two-fuel tank setup with a specialized copper coil. This design will allow them to vaporize the petroleum before it enters the carburetor. It will eventually cut the fuel consumption without affecting the power output. With this revolutionary setup, he and Matteo visit a junkyard the following day. There, they pick up an abandoned tractor and tow it back to their garage. They then redesign its old engine to use a hybrid fuel system and create an affordable machine that's economically viable. Back at his home, Ferruccio learns that Clelia's due date is imminent and promises to return early the following day. Meanwhile, his best friend, Matteo, is still having a hard time to find a girl to settle with. Matteo has a crush on an accountant girl named Anita who works near their garage, but he's too shy to approach her and simply watches her from afar. One afternoon, the two friends are sitting in a local cafe, working on their design. Moments later, Anita disembarks from a bus and heads towards the same cafe. Matteo gawks at her like a fool but doesn't say anything. Ferruccio, fed up with his friend's incompetence, decides to assist him. He then goes inside the cafe and approaches Anita. A few seconds later, he guides her outside and introduces her to his friend. Despite all this, Matteo still cannot gather courage to engage in a conversation. He looks sheepishly at her, forcing Ferruccio to ramble on to keep her hooked. Eventually, their conversation ends in an awkward note, and Anita leaves for her work. Ferruccio is annoyed at his friend and chastises him for not taking his chances. Matteo, on the other hand, points out that the girl seemed more interested in Ferruccio than him. But the latter insists he is married and loves nobody other than his wife. The bickering friends then return back to their garage. Unfortunately, that day after work, both of them get caught up in a very important work. Their prototype tractor is almost ready and the only thing remaining is the logo. Ferruccio is caught up in a meeting with a local designer which takes several hours longer than expected. Eventually, he fails to return home early as he had promised his wife. Back at home, Clelia has gone into labor and begins bleeding severely. She is rushed to the nearby hospital while her husband is still busy at work. He then tries to call the next day as he promised after being held up by work. He comes home to a horrifying scene: blood on the floor. Clelia has been rushed to the hospital due to complications during childbirth. Clelia dies, but their child survives. Ferruccio, distraught and furious, wrecks his workshop. After Clelia's funeral, he proposes a new tractor design to the bank manager, one that's smaller but twice as powerful and cost-effective. The bank agrees to invest, bringing joy to Ferruccio and his brother. During a dinner, they meet Anita. Ferruccio encourages Giorgio to talk to her, but she ends up pursuing Ferruccio instead. Anita confesses her feelings to Ferruccio, who accepts her, given he now has a newborn baby to care for. This causes a rift with Giorgio, who leaves the company, claiming 25% of it. The movie fast-forwards to 1963. Ferruccio is seen buying suits at a bakery and sharing them with his workers at the factory, and with Anita. Anita reminds Ferruccio to spend more time with his son after learning about his son's struggle with school grades from his wife. Ferruccio Lamborghini decides to visit him, gifting him a boat. He promises to reward him with a Ferrari if his grades improve. In their heart-to-heart conversation, Ferruccio confesses that he misses his mother, attributing her as the kindest and smartest person he knew. Her understanding of right and wrong, he says, was unparalleled. The following day, Bob Wallace, an Australian racing driver, shows up at the Lamborghini factory seeking a job. Ferruccio informs him that their focus is solely on trucks. Despite this, Ferruccio introduces him to Enzo Ferrari to discuss a clutch issue he has been facing with Ferrari's engines, offering a potential solution. Ferruccio proposes a partnership between Ferrari and Lamborghini. Enzo dismisses him as a simple farmer, an insult that strengthens the bond between Bob and Ferruccio. Later, Ferruccio visits an art exhibition where a portrait of a bold bull captivates him. The illustrator explains the symbolism of the bull and fighting spirit, prompting Ferruccio's son to voice his hope for the bull's victory. Inspired by this potent imagery, Ferruccio is stirred to create a car embodying the bull's strength, power, and indelible presence. Eager to make this vision a reality, Ferruccio presents his concept to former top executives from Ferrari, Maserati, and Alfa Romeo, whom he has recruited. They initially declare his design impossible. Undeterred, Ferruccio sets an ambitious deadline of 6 months for the debut of the first Lamborghini GT 350 at Geneva, vowing to astonish the crowd anticipating Ferrari's presentation. His aim is not just to succeed, but to create the finest car ever seen, even if the journey involves failures. Anita expressed her concerns that while tractors would always find a market, luxury cars might not. She feared for the company's future, especially with the looming threat of bankruptcy due to increasing petrol prices. Ferruccio, however, was indignant, asserting his right to choose his own path and insisting that he was well-liked by everyone except her. Anita countered that his wealth was the sole reason for their affection, and that bankruptcy would turn them against him. Unimpressed by the presented design the next day, Ferruccio found the car to be excessively large with an overly dramatic grille. He urged the designer to create something truly remarkable. Inspired by the bull from the art exhibit, Ferruccio sketched a bull logo on his napkin that evening and shared it with his friend Bob. Following the unveiling of the new design, Ferruccio inspected the car and, with a few engine modifications, the perfect bonnet was attached, finalizing the Lamborghini GT 350. That evening, Anita misinterpreted Ferruccio's interaction with a woman at a party as flirting, when in fact he was merely sharing his drawings. Hurt, she left the party with their son. The next day, Ferruccio and Bob took the GT 350 for a test drive and were impressed by its efficiency. In a moment of joy, Ferruccio declared he wanted the car painted green. At the 1964 Geneva Auto Show, Ferruccio unveiled the Lamborghini, stunning an audience that had been expecting Ferrari. As a cheeky jab at Enzo Ferrari, he sent him a napkin with a sketch of a bull overpowering a horse, symbolizing his own triumph over Ferrari. Flash forward to the present. Ferruccio and Enzo are engaged in erasing their rivalry. Unfortunately, Lamborghini faces worker strikes due to harsh government regulations and a steep hike in oil prices. During a dinner with his son, Ferruccio learns about his grandchildren and subsequently divides the company between his sons. Despite all efforts, Enzo Ferrari wins the race with the Lamborghini stalled at the starting line. In the aftermath, Ferruccio visits his family farm, reminiscing about his family, particularly his brother and Clelia. He is last seen driving a Lamborghini, contemplating his life's joys.